Another edition of Talk to the Town, and tonight we're bringing you a very special guest. Our Premier of the province, Brian Tobin, is there in the area with the Green Bay Agricultural Fall Fair, and he's given us a few minutes to talk, and we're going to pop a few questions that you, the public, would like to have answered. Welcome to our show.
Delighted to be here. My pleasure.
Now, we're also sharing this with the Springdale community television cameras, so for you want to pan through, we'll see the shared events, and this is something that we hope to see more of in the future. Now, Mr. Tobin, is this your first visit to this area?
It's not my first visit to the area. I've been here a number of times over the years, but obviously this is not a part of the province that I have visited many times. My constituency, as you know, included the Great Northern Peninsula, the Humber Valley area, and also the Bay Verte Peninsula. So it's a part of the province that I don't know real well, and it's always it's always a great pleasure to come and have a chance to meet new people and to become more familiar with a community with which I am less familiar in the province.
And Mr. Tobin, this district, at least for the Springdale area, has long been known as a PC district.
I'm going to stand up here so I can look as tall as you.
Oh, most certainly. And I'll slump over a little bit so I can look as short as you.
That's right. You can help me out.
All right. But it's good, certainly, because Green Bay had a Premier Brian Peckford. Now it's good to have another Brian come out. So we're very pleased that you can come out and visit our area.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. And as you said, over the years, for a long period of time, Springdale has been represented by Conservative members and by former Premier Brian Peckford. But it's an area with a lot of potential. It has some of the same challenges as other parts of the province, with the collapse, at least affecting some communities of the fishery, not so much Springdale. Springdale being a big service center for a great deal of this whole region, but also an area with some of the same potential, in particular in the tourism industry. And as I look around today, during my brief visit today, there's no question that this is one of the most beautiful parts of the province, both in terms of the coastal setting, but looking at the community of Springdale itself, very beautiful community. And I've just heard from one of the operators in this area that the tourism activity this year has been equal to the activity last year during the Cabot 500 celebrations, and that's certainly good news that sector is growing.
Now, we have one real hot topic around here now is the cod fishery, food fishery. With the low level of illegal fishery that was going on, what input is the provincial government going to have on getting us, in future, some more cod fishing?
Well, first of all, let me say through both of these community channels that I'm very proud, as the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, that there has been such a reported low level of illegal activity. I think it shows that we are, as a people, fully aware of our responsibility for conservation. We're aware of the need to respect the rebuilding process for the cod stocks, and that when given an opportunity to participate in a fishery, we'll do so in a responsible fashion. So it certainly strengthens my hand and that of the Minister of Fisheries, John Efford, when we say to David Anderson that we think there ought to be more than a single weekend cod fishery, that we should be given more opportunities, that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians will not abuse the process. And I can assure you that we'll be making the case. We quickly made the case with the bad weather that we wanted that day replaced, and it's going to be. And many of us, and I'll be one of them, will be on the water in the replacement day looking to take a few cod. But we'll be making the case as strongly as we can to give us a few more opportunities. I don't think we necessarily want to have the right to have everybody on the water every day for the entire summer. But I do think it's not unreasonable to ask for a few weekends so that you don't have to worry about, well, if I miss the one weekend that's available, I've lost my chance for the year. So we're hoping that as the scientists do their analysis and as the board, which does the assessment of the cod stocks, completes its work this year, that we may be offered, we think we should be offered, more opportunities to be on the water as part of the recreational food fishery.
Thank you. And Mr. Premier, one of your mandates in the last year or so has been, in particular, has been the education reform. And I know there's been some major changes, and now it's just starting, the school year is starting. Have you gotten any response back in different areas of the province as to how things are progressing?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I can say we have. There were 2 or 3 comments I'd make. Certainly there's been some debate and some discussion about the whole question of assistance within the schools, and Roger Grimes has addressed that in recent days, and we're trying to do more, certainly as much as we can within our budget constraints. That's a problem that we're continuing to monitor. Secondly, if I can put this in as human terms as I can, it has been wonderful in a number of communities. I noted some comments in this community as well, to hear that young people, young students themselves, are very pleased, many of them, to be able to say that it's a good thing that they can go to school with their neighbors, that there is one school, that they all go to the same school, that hopefully a lot of the quality of education that we've seen in some of the denominational schools, Pentecostal schools, for example, or Catholic schools, can be maintained in a non-denominational system. And that certainly in many provinces, with the $50 million fund we put in place to renovate and to build new schools, that many communities are seeing schools this September which have been substantially upgraded, both in terms of the quality of the school itself and also problems with ear quality problems as well. Now, they're not all done. There are some schools that still need additional work, but we've made more gains this past summer. We spent 16 or 17 million than we've spent any time in the last 15 or 20 years. So we're on our way to a better school system, and I think we're off to a fair start this year.
I know some have said that some of the classrooms are just as big, if not bigger now, with the reduction in teachers and so on. How big of a factor is that in the changes?
Well, I have to make a point that there has not been a reduction in teachers. Actually, there has been an increase on a per capita basis in the number of teachers in our school system. Roger Grimes announced last year on behalf of the government that we were putting actually more money in. So if you look at the teacher-student ratio in the province, it's actually improved with the school reform, not weakened.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
You know, you've had a chance throughout the day to look at some of the damage that was caused with the roads in the area during a big rainstorm we've had. What's the government going to do about repairs, and who's going to stand to the responsibility of the cost of it?
Well, actually, we've announced today, we visited, for example, Lassie, and we visited Middle Arm, we visited Seal Cove, a number of places today. When we've announced that we understand that the communities affected, while they've had very substantial impacts, very substantial costs associated with repairing roads, bridges, and so on, communities, quite frankly, are not in a position to undertake those repairs. That this is an act of God, it's an act of nature. It's had major impacts in small communities with small tax bases. So we've announced today that we will undertake, as government, on behalf of all of the citizens of the province, the repairs that are necessary on the Bayvert Peninsula. And I've made that announcement earlier today, visiting a number of communities that have been affected. We won't be asking communities to take loans or to stand behind these amounts. We will assume it as part of the cost of government by going into our own contingency reserve. We expect the cost could be in excess of $1 million, and we'll undertake those repairs immediately. We will be exempting government for these purposes from the Public Tender Act, so there's absolutely no delay, and roads that need to be repaired, culverts that need to be replaced, in some cases bridges that need to be replaced, that the work in all cases gets underway without any delay.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit, Mr. Tobin, about the economy. I know we look worldwide. There's been some major upheaval right around the world. In the States, the dollar in Canada has slipped tremendously. But when we bring it here home to Newfoundland, and more importantly to Springdale, what's your outlook for the Green Bay and Newfoundland in general?
Well, I think we've got to recognize that, yes, there is some turmoil all around the world in the economy, that interest rates, for example, in Canada have gone up by a full percentage point. That's going to affect ultimately the provincial government's cost of borrowing, and it may have some negative consequences for the province in terms of our budget picture. But notwithstanding that, if you look at how Newfoundland and Labrador is performing relative to the rest of the country, Canada this year will have a GDP growth rate of about, or employment growth rate of about 2.5%. Newfoundland's employment growth rate is 3.6% so far from January to August. So we're outperforming the national average. They tell us that our GDP growth rate, and this is not my assessment, this is the assessment of the TD Bank, the Royal Bank, the Conference Board of Canada, that Newfoundland and Labrador by year end will have led the country. So for the first time in a long time, we appear to be moving in the right direction. I know that you don't turn around a very difficult circumstance in a year or two. We said at the time of the last election that we had 2 years of tough decisions to make. By year 3, our economy would begin to grow. We're right on track. We're seeing growth in the tourism sector, manufacturing, the information technology sector. Our fishery will have record landed value this year, primarily because of crab and shrimp and because of some modest recovery in groundfish. So I think the province is on the right track. But I won't pretend that any government can have any easy solutions. It's going to take community leadership. It's interesting that we're here in the Development Association offices here on the highway at this junction in the road, because I think it's organizations like this, the Red Bees and others, working with government that can help turn us around. In the short term, there's $38 million of job creation funds available from the federal government as part of the TAGS wrap-up program. I think that that money has to be used wisely, and that the ideas for prioritizing it have to come from the communities affected. There's $68 million of economic development funds, again, as part of the TAGS wrap-up, and again, the priority for how that those funds should be spent have to come from the communities. Let me just say this. These are one-shot dollars. We can't afford to waste them painting, I hate to use this expression, but painting the graveyard fence. We have to build on our tourism infrastructure, our aquaculture infrastructure, our community infrastructure, things that will help create permanent jobs.
Well, I know one of the things that we have here is our natural beauty, and a lot of our difficulty is getting people in. What about the fact regarding the ferry becoming a, I can't even remember the term now, but
Essential service.
Essential service, yes.
Well, I agree with that entirely. I believe that the national government now, because of the threat of strike several years in a row and the impact that that has had on our tourism sector, has now got to consider declaring it an essential service, putting in place a no strike, no lockout provision in terms of the collective agreement, going to binding arbitration to resolve whatever differences exist. That not only binds the union, it also binds the company, so it's fair to both sides. It's used in many other sectors. We should be seeing the ferry as an extension of the Trans-Canada Highway. But in tourism, we had a 22% increase last year, the largest in Canada in non-resident visitors. And it looks like we're going to equal or better this year last year's increase in the tourism sector. So this is certainly a great opportunity for us. 99 is 4E99, our 50th anniversary year. The millennium year in 2000, there will be a tremendous number, I think, of visitors heading up the Great Northern Peninsula, right in this area. You're part of that same tourism catchment area. When it comes to clean environment, pristine, pure environment, hospitality, a natural ecotourism experience, you can't beat what you have to offer right here. What we have to do is work together to market this region, and I think that that's entirely possible.
Now, you mentioned tourism. With the tourism side, is there anything up and coming in this area? We've heard some mention of the ski trail. Can we see that being promoted to the fullest?
I think that that's something that can move ahead. You're talking about cross-country trails.
The Alexander Murray Hiking Trail.
Correct. I think that's something that can be developed. Again, I go back and say to you, look at the funds that are out there. They're there for the purposes of diversifying the economy, creating jobs to replace those lost with the fishery. This is something that should be brought forward by the Red Bee for this area, by the Development Association for this area, and it's certainly, in my mind, the kind of thing we ought to be doing. I don't want to say today it's going to be funded, because it's going to take a decision of both levels of government. I can't speak for both levels of government, only for one. Right. But that's the kind of thing that I personally get very excited about, because I know that building that kind of infrastructure will draw tourists into this area for the winter tourism trade and will create jobs, just like the skidoo trails. These skidoo trails aren't being built merely for the convenience, although it's an important one, important consideration, of our own snowmobilers. And we have many in Newfoundland. We have more per capita than any other part of Canada, but also because snowmobiling is a multi-billion-dollar business in North America, and we want part of that business coming to our province. They won't come unless we have the facilities to attract them.
And I wanted to ask you as well, Mr. Tobin.
I've got to tell your listeners, there are steaks cooking out there in the barbecue. They smell good. They're beginning to divert my attention away from these television cameras.
Well, so it won't be long.
I'm putting both these gentlemen on.
Won't be much longer.
They stand between me and my T-bone much longer. This is going to get serious. Go ahead.
One more question each. One more question each.
One more each. I wanted to ask you, you put to rest really the issue of the election. I know that was in the media the last little bit.
That's you journalists. You guys are terrible. You went and started that rumor. You promoted it.
I didn't start it.
Talked everybody
but I'm getting on the bandwagon now. When is it going to happen in '99?
Well, there you go. Start it again. I don't look. You know, I've said every time I've been asked that question, I've given the same answer, and I'm sure that every journalist in Newfoundland went back and checked to see what I'd said in the past. And I think they were disappointed when they found that I'd said the same thing consistently. There will be an election sometime between now and the end of the mandate. That's all I've ever said. I can tell you that it wasn't me who cranked up the notion of an election. I've been busy traveling the province this summer, It is something that I always did as a member of Parliament for 17 years. It's probably, I don't know whether it's unusual for a Premier to do it or not, but it's always how I did my business as an MP. Because an MP spends his winter months and spring months in Ottawa.
Right.
Then you spend your summer traveling your district. So that's been my whole pattern on all my years in politics. Now, I travel around year-round, obviously, as Premier of the province, but in the summer, my tradition is to get out and move around the province. And I did that last year, and I did it this year. And a lot of people looked at that and said, well, why is he traveling around? I say I'm traveling around because that's my job. It's the same reason I was in Bayvert today looking at the flood damage. That's my job. And it's the same reason you'll see me continue to travel through this fall. When will we have an election? When it's an appropriate time to have an election. But I have no plans now, at this stage, talking to you, certainly none for an election in 1998, and certainly no plans at this stage for an election in 1999. Whether or not that changes remains to be seen.
Well, when you want to use our media here in Springdale, it's certainly available to you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Now, before we let you go, we know that this area is quite a lot of loggers,
Yeah.
and a lot of the loggers are affected by the strike at the mills. What's being done to alleviate the problem?
Well, unfortunately, when you have a labor dispute between a company and their workers, there isn't really anything government can do to stand in between the company and the union except offer our conciliation services if they're called upon. This particular strike has implications far beyond Newfoundland, as you know,
Right.
broader national implications, and beyond encouraging the parties to get back to the table and offering our Department of Labor services, if those are deemed appropriate. We are, like everybody else, we're sitting back watching this collective bargaining process unfold, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that there's anything we can do to dictate or shape an end to the strike beyond hoping that the parties, as we just saw with the Air Canada strike, for example, even when it looks bleak, get back to the table and find a solution. And at this stage of the game, we can't do more than that. We have asked the federal government to consider extending, and I don't know whether that'll be successful or not, the UI payments for those who've been affected by the strike, but again, that's a matter out of our jurisdiction.
Now, before we let you go, we'd like to invite you to come back and make a prime visit to our Kings Point, Rattling Brook local area and see the beauty. We have a falls over there, and we have a beautiful scenery of the mountains. Rattling Brook has been called a little piece of Switzerland, and I think you'd enjoy a visit.
Well, I look forward to doing that. Graham Flight, by the way, shares your conviction about the scenic beauty of the area because he has spoken of it in caucus, and he too has extended the same invitation to me, and I'll have to take him up on it and take you up on it as well.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you, Mr. Tobin. One more comment I would say to you. There's all kinds of rumors that you're learning French for higher ambitions. You can choose to comment on this however you want. But I speak personally, I'd love to see a Newfoundland Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, ce n'est pas vrai. Je crois que c'est nécessaire pour le Premier ministre de Terre-Neuve parler français avec le francophone du Canada, et particulièrement avec le francophone de Terre-Neuve. Je crois que c'est un avantage pour ma province si je parle français. I'm saying that I think it's a good thing for the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador to be able to speak a few words of French with our fellow Canadians who happen to be francophone, but also with francophones who live in Newfoundland and Labrador. And, you know, many of us in this community, communities all across this province, have our children in French programs, French immersion programs, and I just think it's a good thing to be able to say a few words. Obviously, having spent 17 years in Ottawa, I was able to have my ear attuned to the French language, but I have to confess to you, I'm not really all that good in French. I do make an effort. My job right now is Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. I have a wife and 3 children who share with me the absolute conviction that the best thing we've ever done in the last 20 years is make a decision to be home in Newfoundland and Labrador. I won't say the best thing I've ever done is to become the Premier or to be in politics, because that's not true. But to be back home after being away for 17 years is good. It's good for our souls, brings joy to our family and to ourselves, and I can tell you that whatever I do, again, in the rest of my life, Newfoundland and Labrador is home, will always remain home, and in effect, I don't think we'll ever be leaving again.
All right, thank you so
Cheers.
much. It's certainly a privilege to talk to the fine Premier of Newfoundland Labrador,
Thank you.
Premier Brian Tobin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we
Okay.
do wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and we won't keep you any longer because we know those steaks. We don't want to get them burned
Those
up.
steaks are cooking. This is Newfoundland hospitality at its best. And I have a feeling there's a little bit of homemade bread out there, and I might even be able to find a bit of lassie to go on it. So
I'd say.
I got to go, guys.
See you
Thanks
later.
so much.
Take care.
We appreciate
Cheers.
it.